Welcome to a Wonder Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anderson.
Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it.
Well, Lynn, I really appreciate you joining me today.
It's great to be here with you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an honor. I've been really loving to listen to your work. I've listened to many of your broadcasts and podcasts, and I've read a lot of your work. So the power of intention and the power of healing ourselves is something that's really close to me in my life as a first responder and teaching people breath work and things like that. So I'm just excited to learn about you, learn about what you've learned over the years, and share your wisdom and essence with more people. So
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
yeah, and for those who have never maybe encountered anything to do with your work and they're discovering you today, could you just give a little introduction to who you are and what you're working on and just a basis, and then we'll dig a little deeper.
Okay, great. Well, I'm an odd person in this space because I started out life as an investigative reporter. And my first big story was busting an international baby selling ring, which ended up eventually becoming a book, The Baby Brokers. So I was going to put bad guys in jail. But when I moved over to the UK, and met my husband, Brian Hubbard, we were both really interested as journalists in health, particularly medicine, and what works and what doesn't. So we started a newsletter called What Doctors Don't Tell You, and it's now been going for 35 years, now as a magazine. In the course of that, I kept coming across very good studies of things like spiritual healing. And so the reporter in me said, well, wait a minute. Nothing in our current scientific paradigm can account for a person having a thought, sending it to someone else and making them better. So I set out to try to find out why that could be. And I ended up writing a book called The Field, which demonstrated, after talking to many frontier scientists and who were working in consciousness research, that we are all part of a giant subatomic energy field and that we're all connected. Now, lots of spiritual leaders have said that, and spiritual shaman, etc. It's been part of ancient wisdom, but it hadn't really been demonstrated in science. So I put that together, and that became my book, The Field. And then after that, there was a little bit of unfinished business for me, and that was that numerous scientists had said and constantly indicated through their experiments that thoughts are an actual something with the capacity to change physical matter. So again, the journalist in me was curious, how far can we take this? Are we talking about curing cancer? Or are we talking about just a subtle effect like shifting a quantum particle? So that's how I got into intention, both in creating my own intention experiments and also in studying and writing about the power of intention, and now working with tens of thousands of people around the globe to demonstrate that we are far grander than we've been told. We are far more powerful than we've been told. We have been diminished by our old scientific story. But the new story that's coming forth is demonstrating that we have energies and capacities we've never understood, much less used. And that's what I try to do, is both prove the impossible and help people to live the miraculous.
It's amazing and beautiful work, and I would love to hear some of the things you've discovered and seen over the years as far as healing goes and transformation. And I've been having a lot of guests on the show who study quantum biology, where we're mixing physics and biology and learning about light and water and magnetism and all of the things that just make us human, but we're not really taught that in school. And so a lot of this stuff is very practical and simple almost, but we're just belief system short. I think we have too many limiting beliefs. So I'd love to hear where some of those hangups are in people when you first encounter them with the skepticism and things like that because of our cultural narratives and some of the programming we've been taught, and how to overcome that and how to actually see the healing that's transpired in your work.
Okay, great question. The problem we have today is that we're all living according to a false narrative. Science writes the story that we live by in the main. And our current scientific story is something like 300 and something years old, written by the great physicist Isaac Newton, but who described a world of very well-behaved separate things, operating according to fixed laws in time and space. Now, he revolutionized certain things, particularly things like technology, but that narrative really limited the human spirit, and it was amplified by the work of Charles Darwin, who was very influenced by population studies and the idea that there isn't enough to go around. So he came up with the idea that life must proceed through struggle and dominion. So that narrative put together describes essentially our current leitmotif, which is competitive individualism. There isn't enough to go around, so we better well damn near get there first. And unfortunately, that has become the narrative that we understand, that we are separate and self-contained, lonely people on a lonely planet in a lonely universe. Now, what I discovered way back when I wrote The Field, and then with subsequent work with the intention experiment, with my Power of Eight groups, large and small groups of intention, is that we are not, first of all, alone in any capacity. We're all connected via this quantum energy field, the 0 point field. I also discovered so much of what was at the time that I first wrote The Field, really revolutionary notions of how the body works, that we're all sending out a tiny current of light synchronicitously with other living things, that light seems to be affected or create intention, our thoughts, that our thoughts are things that travel outside of ourselves like trespassers to affect other things. I found that our brain is not a repository of information, much more like an antenna receiver. So all of these ideas describe a situation where it's very difficult to say where I end and the rest of the world begins. And most powerfully of all, I discovered that we have capacities far beyond what we've been told. We have the ability to intend and affect our reality, our lives, the lives of other people, the lives of the world. We can heal ourselves, each other, and the world. We have the ability to see beyond our senses. We have the ability to forecast the future, to receive information. We have the ability even to affect the past. We have all of these capacities. And since I've discovered this, I've not only written about it, but I've tested it. So after I did The Field, I was curious how far we could take this. So I set up a thing called the intention experiment, working with many of those consciousness researchers who were professors at prestigious universities around the world, like Princeton, Penn State, University of Arizona, University of California. And I also, by that time, had a lot of readers. I had The Field in 30 languages around the world. So I thought if I just put them together, I'll have the largest laboratory in the world. And that's what I did in 2007. I set up a thing called the Intention Experiment. And to date, we've run 42 experiments, everything from trying to make seeds grow faster, to purifying water, to lowering violence in war-torn areas, to even healing someone of post-traumatic stress disorder. And of those 42 experiments, 38 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. There's no drug out there with that kind of consistent track record. So what I've demonstrated is that even if people are scattered around the globe and taking part in these intention experiments, and no matter what we're focusing on, whether we're focusing on something on my website or another platform or something in real life, like a violent city or a war zone, we have that hidden capacity to affect it. And that has convinced me that we can heal ourselves, each other, and the world.
It's amazing. I'd love to hear what these experiments look like and what some of the practical examples can be. And what I do really appreciate is that you're describing a new paradigm, a new narrative, which gives people the ability to imagine something beyond the paradigm that we've been conditioned to based on our linguistic models, our cultural models. And I think a lot of the problem that I've heard you bring up and Joe Dispenza, who's your friend, bring up is that when you go to a doctor and you get a negative narrative or a diagnosis, that creates a program that starts to run and trigger a response. And so I'd love to hear also about some of the antidotal thinking that you can do as an individual if you go and get diagnosed with, say, cancer or an injury, which I've received myself and then found some people like you and found ways to heal myself, thank God. But I'd love for people to have practical examples. So let's dig into what these examples look like.
Okay, well, first of all, one thing that I have worked on a great deal is small group intention. And I've found how powerful that is. A year after I started the intention experiments, I started thinking, what happens if I shrink this down to a small group? And I had a workshop coming up in Chicago. It was 2008. And I didn't know what I would do. I was used to having thousands of people join via my website or whatever to do one of these experiments. So I'm kicking it around with my husband, Brian Hubbard, and the rest of our team. And I said, no, I don't know. Maybe I'll put people in small groups and have them send intention to a member of the group with a health challenge. And my husband's a great headline writer. So he looked at me and he pointed to me and he said, I love it, the power of 8. And that is literally how it got the title. But we weren't really sure what was going to happen. So I put people into groups of 8 or so in this workshop. And I thought that it was going to be a bit like getting their back rubbed or having a facial. And I asked them to do an intention for somebody with a health challenge. And then the next day when they came back, I asked the people who had been the recipients to talk about what happened to them. So again, I thought it was going to be a little mild feel-good effect. But that's not what happened. What happened was a woman with very bad arthritis who had been limping the day before walked in normally that day. And somebody else with a bad gut, terrible IBS, said her gut was normal. Somebody else with a terrible depression said it felt lifted. And then the most amazing, somebody else with cataracts said her eyes were about 80% better. So I was actually quite alarmed and frightened by this. So I spent a number of years before I really publicized that, 10 years in all before I wrote the book, The Power of 8, working with people, tens of thousands of people, to test it again and again and again. And what I found, and what I've demonstrated over and over in my courses, in my experiments, and in these groups, the thousands and thousands of groups that exist now, is that a group supersizes that capacity for intention. So one of the first things that I find when you ask, what can people do? with if they get a diagnosis. Well, we have reversed all kinds of things. We reversed numerous cases of stage 4 cancer with the power of intention in a group. And the group is really key. It really supersizes things. But I'll give you 2 examples of people who had what you would consider a hopeless disease, something that cannot be cured. The first was a woman called Lori, who was blind. She was going blind. She couldn't see, she couldn't drive anymore, she couldn't see very well at all. And doctors said, there's nothing we can do for you. You've got retinal damage in both eyes. So she joined my year-long masterclass. I have a signature course where I work with people for an entire year. I put them into groups of 8 or so. I teach them a great deal. I work with them live and interactively, and then we put them in these groups. So her group did an intention for her. And lo and behold, she started realizing she could see clearly for the first time. She now has 20/20 vision. And this was somebody that doctors said, I'm sorry, you're going to be going blind. That was it. And she is completely healed. 1 Power of 8 session. Another woman called Lisa had, she had been born with a genetic liver disease. And her body didn't produce the kind of enzyme that her liver needed. And so her liver was deteriorating. Her spleen was enlarged. She was really worried. And the only alternative she had was a liver transplant. And she was only a woman in her 40s. So again, she joined a group that was doing Power of 8 sessions. She did it. She felt this extraordinary thing going through her body, this very cold energy going through and feeling it around her liver. She knew something huge had happened. And when she went back to see the doctor some months later, they scanned her regularly. Not 1, but 2 specialists in liver issues scanned her and said, your liver and spleen are normal. And they have continued to be normal for years now. So those are 2 examples, but we've had people heal not only all manner of health issues, but also all manner of situations in their lives, whether it is repairing a relationship, whether estranged or otherwise, whether it is creating a new relationship, fixing your finances, getting a new job or improving the one you have, even finding the thing you were put on this earth to do, your life purpose. All of these things seem to be amplified and helped in a group. So I would say that's my number 1 medicine when people have healing issues. The other thing that you touched on is really important. So important, I actually teach a course for practitioners called Become a Better Healer, because I have found that sometimes even the best alternative or conventional practitioners might be brilliant at what they do, but their thoughts and languaging around it are terrible. And there have been studies, there's 1 study I know of that's really convincing, that took 2 groups of patients. Both groups were given a placebo. So nobody got any real medicine. And this is, I believe it was for something like carpal tunnel syndrome, pain in your arms from repetitive strain. 1 group were given this placebo with a doctor who said, and both of them were doctors, medical doctors, this is going to help you. This will work. Don't worry about it. I know we can help you. Really positive, really upbeat. The other doctor said, well, we're not really sure what you've got, but we'll give this drug a try, but I'm not really sure if it'll work. So he was a bit uncertain. It turned out that there was a 61% difference in patient outcome with the doctor who had that positive point of view. So finding a practitioner who is going to be a cheerleader for your healing is really, really key too.
Yeah, that's really powerful because a lot of doctors now just immediately tell you that you need something outside of yourself, a surgeon or a pain medicine or something that's going to heal you or help you. But the power of hope that I've heard you mention many times is so important, to have that peace at the base and to know that you are going to heal and to know that it is going to be certain that you can overcome this. And even on my fire station, we have a big glowing hope sign because the Phoenix Children's Hospital is up above us looking down. And it really, we get letters all the time from children and from parents that say that that really gave them hope because they look out at night and they could see that glowing sign. And so I really do, I love that you do that for people and you help them to reinforce that piece, especially for the healers and for the doctors to have that, because a lot of times they don't even know. It's like they have great intention too, and they really want to help people, but their own programming from our cultural conditioning has taken set forth, and it's actually causing more harm in that way, so that's beautiful.
Absolutely. Hope is the most important remedy there is. I mean, I saw it with my own mother in law, who was diagnosed with end stage breast cancer. And she was too late for any conventional medicine. So we brought her up to a doctor we had discovered and spoken to many times because of our work with What Doctors Don't Tell You. And he had healed many, many cases of both cancer and multiple sclerosis through an integrative approach. So we brought Edie to him, and I was actually in the examining room with her to give her a little bit of cheerleading myself while she was there, because it was a very strange experience for this woman. And he examined her, and her GP, her regular doctor, had recoiled in horror when he saw her breast. It looked like raw meat. But Patrick Kingsley did not. All he did when he looked at it was say, "Yeah, I think we can handle that." And I knew then that she was probably going to be healed through him because, and very likely, and it was true, without chemo, without radiotherapy, with an integrative cocktail of very high dose vitamin C and other nutrients, very high doses, plus slight changes to her diet, etc. She lived many more years, not the 3 months she was told. And I think the main drug that she was given was hope. Absolutely. And I feel it is the number one medicine there is.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a beautiful story. Can you talk a little bit about what happens when people become identified with healing and they get caught in the path of, and I've seen this, you've seen this, where they're going from workshop to workshop and they're constantly seeking, and it becomes its own course of a trap. And so I've heard you speak to altruism and getting off of yourself. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. It is a trap. I think one of the problems with the 21st century is self help, because everybody sort of focuses on themselves. We are still the me generation, as Tom Wolfe said. It's about me, it's about self care, it's about self, self, self. But when you look at the evidence for altruism, you can see that it is the ultimate healer. People who do things for other people, and I'm talking about the science, I've studied it in great detail. People who do things for other people live longer, healthier, happier lives. Even if you're ill with something, if you help somebody else with the same illness, you're more likely to be healed yourself. And I've seen that in action with my Power of Eight groups, because when people are stuck in one of my courses, if they're working with me, and I've seen many people who got stuck, it's just not working for them. And after a while, I will say, okay, let's get off of yourself. Why don't you try sending intention to someone else in your group with more of a health challenge than you, or more of a challenge in their life? And I have found over and over again, as soon as people do that, their lives, their own lives begin to heal. I'll give you an example of that. Andy Spiros. Andy was trying to get a new job. That was her big intention with her Power of Eight group. She had just gone through a divorce. She had 2 small children, and she had sold her gift store business, so she needed money. But she was trying and trying and trying, applying here, there, and everywhere, and just wasn't getting anywhere. So I finally said, Andy, get off of yourself. Why did you intend for Luke? This was a young boy who was only 15 at the time, had broken up with his first serious girlfriend, and in a fit of adolescent angst, he'd thrown himself off of a 40-foot structure onto hard ground. Luke broke every bone in his body. He had brain damage, nerve damage, and doctors didn't think he was going to live. So his parents, who were followers of my work, wrote me and said, please, can you do intentions for Luke? So I got my whole masterclass to do intentions for Luke on 3 successive Saturdays. And while his parents sent me a running commentary of what was happening to Luke right after our intentions. Now, Luke got better in record time. He's now a normal, healthy young man in his early 20s. But the interesting thing was what happened to Andy. As soon as she did that, Andy got a call out of nowhere from somebody she didn't even know, offering her her dream job. So I've seen that kind of thing over and over again. Life rewards people who get off of themselves. And that's one of the beauties of a Power of Eight group. You're intending for other people 7/8 of the time. Then it's your turn. Then you go and you intend for other people again. And so it goes.
It's beautiful. I would love to hear, before we hit record, you were speaking about some of the current work you're doing with your husband, about the past and healing in that way. And I would also like to ask you about gratitude and the power of just truly taking account for what's going right and the miracle of life and the body's complexity and those type of healing components too, because I'm really big on that.
Those are great questions. First of all, one of the things that I've done is started working out of time with intention. So I've been working with intention for many, many years, but I've also been studying, of course, quantum physics and much of the new science. And any quantum physicist worth his salt will now say there's no such thing as sequential time. There's no such thing as sequential space either. Everything is one big smeared out now and one big smeared out here, according to the subatomic world. Now, human beings create sequential time. And what we've discovered and what my husband, Brian Hubbard, has pioneered in his revolutionary work, Time Light, is that time is an energy. It's not a dimension, it's an energy, which is why some traumatic incident, whether it was just a teacher humiliating you or your parents shouting at you, all the way to getting raped or abused in some way, whatever it's been, that traumatic incident can sit on your shoulder and be present 30 years later as though it happened yesterday. Time is an energy and it needs to be diffused and eliminated. And so what I have been doing is working with retro intention, not changing that traumatic incident, but changing the person's response to it so that they are able to take back their power and eliminate that old energy, create a new energy around it. And it's extraordinary what that does. We also do work with looking at patterning and how that pattern shows up. So we've been doing this in retreats for a number of years, but this year, for the first time, we're running an online course with this. So we put people into groups and pairs. We have them work individually as well and do retro intention exercises. We have a number of exercises with patterning. And what I've found is that people are unreliable narrators because they see life after that trauma, they see life through a lens of the past. As my husband says, there's no you. You are a connection and a collection of past incidents that have created the you that faces the world. And so we unpack that unreliable narrator so that you can see the world for what it really is. And we also teach, as you talked about it, forgiveness and gratitude exercises. Forgiveness is really important, and we help people see things completely in the round by 360 degrees so that they understand more and once again diffuse that energy of the past. The gratitude is so important to get off of yourself and to see your life in the present moment. And that's the other aspect of this is being present in the present. That's one of the great things about a Power of Eight group and one of the things that we help people with. But gratitude, sometimes people are so overwhelmed by their past that they cannot be grateful for the present. So we try to help them do that. But those kinds of positive emotions are really key. I give you an example of this. Kelly Turner, who wrote the book Radical Remission, really fascinated me because she decided to find out why there are certain people who survive end-stage cancer. So she went and interviewed hundreds of people who had come back from and absolutely overcome the odds. And she wanted to see what were the similarities between these various people. And she found they had 9 common qualities. And the fascinating part of it was only 2 of them concerned the body. Only 2 concerned changing my diet, eating more healthily, and taking the right supplements and doing the right exercise. The other 7 were all psycho-spiritual changes. They had a good community. They had a very vibrant spiritual life. They were helpful with others. They were well connected. They had a strong belief system. And they were grateful. They were positive and grateful. So these were people who had accepted what had happened, but were totally connected, focused on the present, and connected to something higher and larger than themselves. All of these things, I think, are key to healing.
I love that. And I would love to dive into your husband's work someday too, now that you're bringing him up multiple times. And I'm curious what your thoughts are around somatic work. I've had Peter Levine and others on with embodiment practices. Do you involve a lot of those types of things in your work?
What we do is we work on regulating the vagus nerve. But here's the interesting thing about it. We've done studies of people before and after intention experiments. We just did one in last February, and we measured their nervous systems before and afterward. And we found that before the intention experiment, there was a huge predominance of sympathetic nervous system activity, which is the fight or flight activity. Now, that is dominant in most of us now because we're reading the newspapers, we're watching what's happening in the world, and we're completely freaking out. And we're all getting flooded with cortisol and fight or flight at every moment. So the people that we measured 44 people just randomly from our audience. And we found beforehand all very sympathetic nervous system dominant. Afterward, their nervous systems were very much more regulated, and also their stress levels had dived down hugely, significantly. Just being part of a Power of Eight group intending for something altruistic calmed the nervous system hugely. And I find that with Power of Eight groups too. Now, just to get biological and technical for a moment, the nervous system, that sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, is controlled by the vagus nerve, the biggest nerve of the body. It sits at the base of the neck. It connects with every major organ of the body, and it regulates sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. It's also tied into heart rate variability. And so when people want to measure vagus nerve and how people are regulated, they also look at heart rate variability. You know, a healthy heart has slight heart rate variability. And we have found that this vagus nerve activity can regulate the heart, and intention also is a way of bringing people together. The other thing that's been measured is that when people do things in a group, when they do something altruistic in a group, that also essentially turns on the third level of the vagus nerve, which is connection and safety. So a Power of Eight group doesn't just help you with an immediate issue you have, but it also helps to regulate your body, an ongoing regulation that can carry on. So that is one of the really interesting things. In terms of somatic stuff, and my husband has certainly read Peter Levine, we have a different approach, but we find he has 21 exercises that he helps people do that help to bring them into the present. But the work that we do on overcoming the past is really unlike anybody else's, to be honest.
I love that. And I really feel like there's an issue right now, and I think you're probably aware of this, where we would say there's an epidemic of identification with trauma and using that word a little too much, as we all have trauma and we all know that this is a big part of our healing journey. But now I think a lot of times what's happening is that narrative has become so prevalent in the culture. I'd love to hear what you think about maybe the big pharmaceutical companies being tied to this narrative and other incentivization structures being tied to this narrative of everybody almost becomes a victim. And then if you're a victim of your trauma, instead of thinking of it as a part of being a human being and what are the tools and things that we can do to acknowledge and overcome, which is what your work is focused on. But what are some of the issues with what you would call trauma culture, if you want to call it that?
Oh, gosh, what a great question. I mean, there's a huge problem with it now. It's now so prevalent, the idea of mental illness, number one. And number two, there's also a big issue of the pharmaceutical industry identifying certain conditions with a name, with a label, and having the patient identify it as a label. There's a young woman that I know who was told she had anxiety. She was living with her boyfriend. The plan was they were always going to get married. They were together for 10 years, and then he broke up with her. Now, she was by now in her early 30s, and of course she'd be upset. Of course she would be anxious and be grieving and all of those things. But the doctors convinced her that she has ongoing anxiety, and now it's become my anxiety. And I think there is this over-identification with my ADHD, my anxiety, my whatever, my depression, and that is my natural state of being, rather than maybe this is because of that false narrative that I have seen myself as a victim of whatever happened. Because as you say, stuff happens to all of us. Now, it is important to deal with things. My husband talks about the 18 ACEs, adverse childhood events. And now they've demonstrated that people with 4 or more of those, I think it is, live shorter lives, have more difficulties, have real health issues. So it's important to deal with them. And they can be anything from, your parents screamed at you to your parent raped you, and everything in between. But what we have found is there are ways to release that energy. And I do feel that we have created, through this labeling, through calling, through overdiagnosis of things like autism, ADHD, depression, anxiety, all of those things, we have created a culture of victimhood. And I think the biggest antidote to that, to be honest, is getting off of yourself and doing something for somebody else. As I say, even if it's tiny, helping your neighbor with their take out their garbage, you are more likely to live happily. And even people who have, for instance, lost their jobs, this was one study I remember, found that they did not suffer from depression as long as they had a strong community and a strong spiritual sense. So I think there are a number of things that are really important here. And one of the big things that we haven't really talked about is community. One of the other aspects of modern culture is we're more isolated than ever before. And I looked at this whole issue and investigated it because I wanted to see whether or not Darwin was right. Were we meant to be competitively individualistic? And I wrote a book called The Bond, which resoundingly says no. We need to belong more than we need to breathe. We need to be part of something bigger. And community has disintegrated in modern times. And so what I hope and what I find with Power of Eight groups is that for many people becomes their community. It becomes their intention family. I think of a man called Jerry who joined one of my master classes in, I think it was 2020, I think. So it was during COVID and lockdown. Nevertheless, he met with his group. As I say, they all have to meet virtually on Zoom or something like it every week for a year. And at the end of it, he said, I've had more love in my life this year than I ever have any time that I can remember. So he joined the master class for the next year. And I said, Jerry, you're going to learn the same stuff. He said, it doesn't matter. I had so much love, I wanted more. So he joined it. And by the end of the second year, he said, I now know what love is. He meets with both groups. He continues to meet with them. They are his family, his community, his love. And so I think that's a really key piece of getting us out of this issue. There's so many reasons why we feel so alone. We have so much anxiety. Of course, it's the media now. Of course, it is the aftershocks of COVID and lockdown. Of course, it is modern times, and the pressures on all of us, the online obsessions we all have now, and more. But it also is that we've forgotten and we have lost that just neighborhoods and communities that are so important to the human experience. So, in a sense, with Power of Eight groups, I'm trying to bring them back.
That's amazing. Yeah, I believe in that. I really resonate with the community piece. And I've also noticed the attention economy sort of keeping people from their connection to nature. So getting outside more, getting in natural light, just getting human again, doing the things that were fundamentally our natural state. And time in nature is something that we're so far removed from as a culture, as a species. So I have you at the hour now. I would love to ask you, if you were going to die today, this was the last thing you could say to the world, what would you want to share?
That is brilliant. Okay, if I were going to die today, I think I would share this. Do you want me to just say a sentence or do you want me to say something?
It can be as long as you want.
Okay. If I were going to die today, I would urge everyone to create intentional groups and also to be with people and work with people who are not like them in these groups. One of the most profound intention experiments I have run enabled me to use special equipment so I could put cameras in 9 different locations. So I decided to put a camera in the conference rooms of nine different places, and 8 of them were in different conference rooms in different Arab cities. And the 9th camera was in an audience of Israeli Jews. So we had Arabs and Israelis coming together to do an intention experiment. We focused on Jerusalem because it was going through a lot of violence, and it was an area that everyone of every religion has an attachment to. At the end, because of this special equipment, I could speak to the different people in the different conference rooms, and they could speak to us, and everyone else would hear. So I asked them how it was for them. Now, before this whole event, I had to broker the whole deal because the Arabs and the Israelis weren't talking to each other. But by the end, the Arabs were saying to the Israelis, "Your God is my God. We love you, brothers and sisters." The Israelis were saying the same thing back. It was a big love fest. What I have discovered when people come together in a small or large group to intend for something bigger than themselves, to intend to heal something, whether it is themselves, each other, the world, something magical happens. I also have seen through Harvard research that when you do something kind, it goes 3 degrees down a social network. So if I'm kind to Peter, he's more likely to be kind to Paul, who's more likely to be kind to Jane, who's more likely to be kind to Sarah, and so forth. And everyone continues to be kind. So if you started thinking about just a small group of people doing this kind of thing, a few hundred, a few thousand, when you start calculating how many people each one of these people knows, let's say they all know about 500 people, which is a kind of the guesstimate of how many people we all know with all of our social media, etc. You'd start affecting millions and millions and millions of people. So I have 2 messages that are my deathbed messages. Number 1, find a Power of 8 group and do intentions for yourselves, each other, and the world. And secondly, continue to connect and understand that you need community. You want a long and happy life? Be connected, because you, more than anything else, need to belong. And that's the key to thriving.
Well said. So beautiful, Lynn. I really appreciate your words, and it's an honor to have you here, and it's going to be so nice to be able to share you with people maybe who've never even discovered you yet. So I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely. It's been lovely being with you. We'll have my team introduce you to Brian too. I think he's just launching a professional course for practitioners, and you may be interested in that. And also, well done for being a first responder. That's so cool.
Oh, thank you so much. And I look forward to connecting with him. And yeah, it's an honor to do what I'm doing in this world, and I feel lucky. So it's nice to talk to you.
Wonderful. Nice. So lovely to talk to you too. Thank you so much. And my team will send you stuff if you need a link for the Heal Your Past stuff and anything more. We'll send that across to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes, and rate the show. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
what we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.